Okay, this week Parshas Chukas begins with the story, the laws, the details of the Parah Adumah. And then there's a very loaded parsha, as we say. It has Miriam passing away. Clearly, the subsequent events are that Moshe Rabbeinu hits the rock and gets punished, him and Aharon, that they will not be entering Eretz Yisrael. Aharon HaKohen passes away, war with Amalek. There's a lot going on. The Gemara Mayikotin has a fascinating statement. Mayikotin 28a says, why is the story of Miriam's passing away placed in the Torah next to the laws of the Parah Adumah? To teach us a fascinating law. When a tzaddik, with the Parah Adumah, what does it do? It purifies the nation. So the same thing when a tzaddik passes away, or a tzaddikas, Miriam, it purifies the nation. Yes, but it doesn't say by it says by Miriam, because Miriam's earlier in the parsha. So because the Parah Adumah is next to Miriam, we now have a hemshach, and we say that they have the same results come out of them. Just like Parah Adumah purifies, Misa Tzaddik can purify. Clearly, when you read the Gemara, that means that the Gemara is implying on some level that these two events shouldn't go next to each other. Okay. Why shouldn't they go next to each other? The easiest explanation is going to be that the laws of Parah Adumah do not apply here. When did Miriam pass away? Miriam passed away the last year the Jewish people were in the desert, year 40. When did Miriam pass away? According to Chazal, in Nisan time, about a year before they actually entered Eretz Yisrael. So Miriam passed away, and the story of Parah Adumah, if you're reading the Torah as is, you might think that Parah Adumah was applicable in the 40th year in the desert. The Gemara is not saying all this out loud, but the Gemara is saying it doesn't belong next to each other, and therefore the next to each other teach you this idea. So we're going to discuss tonight when the Parah Adumah did become applicable. Just to show, because Mark said something intelligent, right? The Emek Dover, Mek Shachion, all right? The Emek Dover, the Tziv says, why is the laws of Parah Adumah placed next to the Misa of Aharon HaKohen? What Mark wanted to say. The Gemara gives his answer. You can't argue the Gemara. Why is in this parsha Miriam dying and Aharon dying? He says, yeah, it's a connection as well. What's the connection as well? He said, because when Aharon passed away, who took over? His son took over. Allah took over. Now, if you listen to the 3-minute video, because David walked in, so we have to remind him, if you listen to this week's weekly, what do we say? That the Parah Adumah the procedure was done by Elazar. So the Emek Dover says, the Netziv says, I want to tell you something. You know why you put the Parah Adumah next to that? I'll tell you why. Because a lot of times when a big Rebbe passes away and one of his kids take over, we're headed in that direction, 45th, 48th, one of the Rebbes take over, becomes a thing. Which should it be? Which side? And then they say, he wasn't as big as the Tata. Right away, there are the naysayers, not as big as the Tata. So when Aharon HaKohen, the first Kohen Gadol in Jewish history, was passed away, his son took over, there were going to be naysayers. They saying, Aharon HaKohen, he was unbelievable, Roider Shalom, and we have Mishnahs about him, everyone loved him. Allah said, nah, he's not that good. He only got it, why? Nepotism. So the Torah placed the story of the procedure of the Parah Adumah next to Mrs. Aharon to tell you, by the way, that's not true. Allah didn't only start his monarchy, if that's called by a Kohen Gadol, he didn't start his leadership as Kohen Gadol when his father passed away, as if he wasn't royal Lakach otherwise. No, when his father was alive, HaKadosh Baruch Hu already made a command. Parah Adumah goes through Elazar. So we have a connection in this week's parsha from the beginning of the parsha of Parah Adumah, both to Miriam's passing away, Gemara, and to Aharon HaKohen's passing away, Netziv. But the underlying concept is that the parsha does not belong here. It doesn't belong here. We're putting it here to teach us something, but it belongs somewhere else. So where does it belong? So there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin. Gemara in Sanhedrin, Nun Vav Amabez. Yes. V'asanya Eser mitzvahs nitztavu Yisrael b'Marah. 10 mitzvahs the Jews were in Marah. Now, just for the record, historically speaking, when did the Jews get to Marah? 3 or 4 days after Kriyas Yamsuf, which we'll get to in a second. That was almost the first, I think it depends on what you count on Chukas, the place called Chukas, which is a debate. But Marah is one of the, if not the first stop, one of the first stops, depending on what you call a stop. Open Gemara. Eser mitzvahs nitztavu Yisrael b'Marah. 10 mitzvahs the Jews were commanded in Marah. This is before Sinai. Mark, what are the 10? First, easy. Sheva, shekibul aleim b'nei Noach. The 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. Now they got out of Mitzrayim. They're no longer slaves. They got the first 7 as well. For Asifu aleim, 3 more. Dinin. Dinim means the basic laws of Mishpatim, we'll say. Dinim. V'Shabbos. V'Kibbut Aveim. 10. In Marah, before Sinai. So if you stop here, your question should be, okay, why am I mentioning this at all now? It's nothing to do with us here. But I will show you a Rashi. A Rashi in Beshalach, unbelievable. We'll get the Tesvav Chavhei. Tesvav Chavhei. It says the Jews, this is Mamish right after Shira Hayam. Shira Hayam ends, and then it has Miriam's Shira, related to this week's Parsha, and then starts with this. Vayasa Moshe Yisrael Yamsuf. The Jews left the Yamsuf. Vayetzu al Midbar Shur. They went 3 days, they didn't find Mayim. Vayavoyu Marah Sa. Hey, at the end. They came to Marah. This is Mamish right after the Kriyas Yamsuf. They had no water because it was bitter water. And the people complained. And they took a stick, an eitz, which certain Rishonim learned was a special eitz of bitterness, and he threw it into the water, vayimtaku amayim, and became sweet. They had water that was bitter, they put in more salt, 2 negatives make a positive, became great. And now, interesting pasuk, Shom, over there in Marah, prior to Sinai, some loy, they were given choik umishpat. They were given choik umishpat. So Rashi says here, fascinating, right? What does Rashi, what does choik and mishpat mean? Choik means not understandable halachas, and mishpat means understandable. So it says this, Bimara, open Rashi. Bimara, nitin lehem, miktzas parshas, they got some of the parshas shel Torah, she'isasku behem, that they should be busy already learning. Shabbos, para adumah, v'dinin. So here Rashi says, Shabbos, para adumah, v'dinin, and the Gemara said, Shabbos, kibbut aveim, and dinin. But according to this Rashi, if you stop right here, when was the para adumah given? Before Sinai. When is it being mentioned in the Torah, the details? 40th year. Around the 40th, or at least it's given around that time. Miriam passed away in the 40th year. That's where we have the laws right there. Maybe it was a little earlier, but around that time. It's a massive 40-year span of when it was given to when the Torah is relaying it to us. But this Rashi is very fair, because we just said, the Gemara says, Lords, Dinin, Kibbut Aveim and Shabbos, and Rashi made a substitute. Rashi switched Kibbut Aveim and put in Parah Adumah. So, for a test from last night, looking at you, since I let you get away with it last night we said in the middle of the drasha last night, that in the old days, pre-printing press, it was very difficult to write. Sefer Torah took a very long time. Mezuzahs took a very long time. So what they tried to do sometimes was, what they would do is, they would make acronyms, shorten things. It's easier. They would make one paragraph. You don't have to buy enough parchment. If you start losing the paragraph spaces, you got a lot there. So some has this kasha on Rashi. They're saying, Rashi, you say it says Parah Adumah and Marah. The Gemara says Kibbut Aveim, Dinim and Shabbos. Doesn't say Parah Adumah. Where'd you come up with this? Can't be. Rashi, where are you coming up with this idea? You're not like the Gemara. So they say, yeah, typo. Why? Because someone wanted to save on the acronym. Someone wanted to save space. So what they did was they wrote the word Dinim, probably. Maybe they put a dollar, I don't know. Then they wrote Kibbut Av. How would you put an acronym for Kibbut Av? Chof, Strechel, Aleph. And by the way, if you look at the original printing going back to the 1500s, the Bamberg Shas, a lot of times they didn't even put the Strechel. So when they would say Perek Ches, it would be a Pei, then a Ches. Prakim they had. Rishonim had Prakim. We discussed that yesterday. They didn't have page numbers. That was done by Bamberg. So a lot of times when you look at the early Bamberg printings himself, he came up with dafs. He would write Pei Ches, which would be Perek Ches, and then he would say Yud, which is Daf Yud. They didn't have Strechel. So I'm saying Strechel, but you might not need the Strechel. So what they did was, the old timers, they wrote Dinim, maybe they wrote Dalet, they wrote Kibbut Av, Chaf Aleph, and then they wrote Shabbos. So the difference between a Chaf Aleph and a Pei Aleph is what? Depends on what script you're using and what font you're using, but a lot of times it's a droplet of ink. So, who says this? The Torah T'mimah. The Torah T'mimah says, I want to tell you something. Everyone wonders about this Rashi. Where does Rashi come up with the idea to say that Parah Adumah, when was it given? We know it's out of place because the Gemara says it was given. It belong in this week's parsha. It was given out of place. Where does it belong? Oh, I'll tell you what Rashi says. Rashi says it belongs in Marah. We all ask on Rashi. Gemara says it doesn't belong in Marah. Yeah, typo. At one point in time, it was a Chaf Aleph. Then some guy was reading it and he read it wrong, or the ink spilled extra and he read Pei Aleph. And then some other guy came along each side and said, listen, who reads acronyms? It's hard acronyms, right? Let's open up the acronym. But he was reading the wrong acronym. So he read Pei Aleph. Brilliant answer about Torah to son. Although many point out that, as brilliant as it is, unlikely that would be the proper answer in Rashi. Why? First of all, the Ramban and the other Rishonim on this Rashi quote Paraduma. So you tell me, at what point was there a mistake in the typing and made the mistake and fixed? The Ramban missed it. And could the Ramban have missed it? But that's not even as bad as it gets. In Perek Chav Daled, Pasuk Gimel, 24:3, Rashi says, Vayavai Moshe v'yasap alehem es kol divrei Hashem es kol ha-mishpatim vayan kol ha'am kol echad v'yomu kol ha-dvar shadibar Hashem nasa, the beginning of Nasa v'nishma. And Rashi says, when it says kol ha-mishpatim, that they said Nasa v'nishma before Sinai, right? Nasa before Sinai, again, which mitzvahs are we referring to? Rashi says, Sheva mitzvah shenasav b'nei Noach. Yeah, we know that happened before Sinai. V'Shabbos, we know that one. Kibbut avayim, Gemara, u'paraduma, v'dinim. So Rashi here said both. He said Kibbut avayim and paraduma. So if there was a typo, because originally it said one acronym, the Mehechatei said that, Rashi here says both. So clearly Rashi was learning that the idea of the paraduma was given was at Marah. It does not belong in this week's parsha. It's only here in this week's parsha. Why? Because we want to connect it to either Miriam's death or Aaron's death. Ayin Sham B'drashas that they say over there. But when it was given now, becomes we have one answer. But that's not the end of the story. If we'd stop here, we think we know a lot, but we made a major mistake. Because I only quoted you one Gemara. The Gemara that says what was given in Marah. And the Gemara that says it was given in Marah says what? Sheva mitzvahs, dinin, Shabbos, and kibbut av. But there's another Gemara in Gittin. The Gemara in Gittin says that on the first day of Nisan, when the Mishkan was inaugurated for the first time, there were many crowns given to the Jewish nation. And one of the crowns was that they were given the laws of Paraduma. Why? Because the next day, they were going to start the process of Paraduma in order for the next week, build the Mishkan for the first time. So even if you want to answer for Rashi and say Rashi meant Paraduma, maybe yeah, maybe no, you come up with all the ideas. Wait a second. There's an open Gemara that states that the laws of Paraduma, again, way before the 40th year, but this is not before Sinai. This is year 2 in the desert when they're starting to build the Mishkan. And by the way, an obvious answer, some will say, we spoke about it a couple times, that when do you have to have, when the people came and they said, we're contaminated, we can't bring a carbon Pesach. So the Paraduma was there, Pesach time, year 2, when it became a practical advice. So there's a question here. Rashi, we understand. How are you going to say this? And by the way, the Rishonim, the commentators on Rashi, they have 2 questions on Rashi. One, the Gemara doesn't say Paraduma, and one, the Gemara elsewhere says Paraduma was given the next year. That's a much bigger problem. So we have to try to answer these things. And different Rishonim answer different things. I think, personal opinion, the easiest approach is, Judd, what's usually our easiest approach? There's a second easiest approach. The first easy approach we did yesterday and 15 other times, Hirosh. That's always the easy approach. There's another easy approach also. The easy approach is that you can say, and they do it many times, that what Hashem said to Moshe, there was a delay to Moshe saying it to Klal Yisrael. Which you could say, you have to know why, that Hashem, Rashi saying, listen, what was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, I'll tell you what was given. Paraduma was given pre-Sinai in a place called Marah. Okay, but the Gemara says it was given, practically speaking, they had to do a Paraduma because the next day, a year later, that's when Moshe Rabbeinu decided to tell to Klal Yisrael. He didn't say it beforehand. He knew the halachas. He knew it was not practical at that moment in time. They were learning at that moment in time dinim, Hilchas Shabbos. I mean, guys, how much time do you have a day, right? Hilchas Shabbos could take you and dinim alone. So you figure Paraduma, well, okay, we'll vat until it becomes a practical idea. I'll wait 1 year until it becomes practical. That's one approach. Second approach, and again, it makes sense in a way. He didn't repeat it because it wasn't practical. Second approach is that, no, I mean, it says he gave Shabbos and dinim, so what? He gave all of those and held back one. It's a little hard to understand. They said, no. What it means is that Moshe Rabbeinu did give over the general rules of Paraduma a year before. General rules. But the specific details, that comes now. Now, if you look through the early Rishonim, Cheskuni, Tosfos al Torah, they seem to divide our parsha up in Chukas. And they say when you look at our parsha, it's a long one. Parsha's Parah, in the beginning of our parsha, is the Kayin has a long aliyah this week, I think. What they do is, because half of it was given a year earlier, and half it was given a year later. So either way we have till now. The mitzvah of Parah Adumah was not given in this week's parsha. We have drashas on why it's mentioned in this week's parsha, but it was given way earlier. We have a Rashi, we love Rashi, a great grandfather of all of us. We have Rashi saying it was done in Marah, but that doesn't stem with the Gemara so well. So we have to come up with different terutzim on why Rashi and the Gemara would fit as well. There are others, as I said a minute ago, that say that even though Rashi said it was a Marah, and it says it was given, the Gemara says it was given, you could say, another famous answer in Judaism, machlokes, a machlokes. That means Rashi is quoting one medrash, and then there are other medrashim. In fact, when you read the medrashim, it seems to be there are differences in this week's Parshas Medrash of how Moshe Rabbeinu responded. Another potential reason on why it's not clear if it's why it's mentioned here, but more probably why it was given here. Mind-blowing. Rishonim say this. That means they're saying, ignore the Gemara. Gemara is one person. Ignore Rashi, maybe. The Medrashim say like this. The reason why now it had to be given is because practically speaking, it became on a different level of what now they needed it. Why? Because it's possible to this year 40, we're about to head into Israel. If we head into Israel, there's going to be a war. They're not giving up the land. Brand news flash for the Jews. The Palestinians ain't giving up the land that fast. So it's going to be a war. Yericha and all these things. Which means they're going to be dead bodies. Not necessarily Jewish dead bodies they add. Could be Goyish dead bodies. But Goyish dead bodies contaminate. Not in a tent. You walk into a house with a Goyish dead body, you're okay. If you're a Kohen and you're not contaminated. But if you touch or you move a non-Jewish dead body, there is contamination. So which meant the Jews were now looking and they're saying, okay, time for training. We have to have basic training. We got to know how to shoot an arrow now. We got to know how to do this. We got to move things out of the way. There's going to be major contamination here. And they turned to Moshe and like, listen, buddy, how does this work right now? How does the Parah Adumah stuff work? So, according to some, depends how you want to read it, they knew that Moshe Rabbeinu did it 40 years ago. But it's placed in this week's Parsha because now they were getting nervous on how to use it because they were afraid how much ashes are available. Moshe Rabbeinu, we slaughtered a parah 40 years ago. I'm saying there weren't so many dead bodies. Oh, there were dead bodies, but we're using up the ashes slowly. That doesn't look like a lot of ashes. Now, the halacha, by the way, is you could sprinkle one ash on 1,000 people and it works. But maybe they didn't know that at that point in time. So they would turn to Moshe Rabbeinu and say, Moshe Rabbeinu, what are we doing here with the Parah Adumah? How are we going to do it? So Moshe Rabbeinu, toward the end of the 40 years, was reiterating the laws of Parah Adumah. So another potential reason why we have to do it now. We'll go one more reason, then we'll do Ma'ariv. We said we want to attach this every part of the Torah. So Parshas Chukas Parah Adumah is going to attach to last week's Kairach. It's going to attach about to go into Eretz. It's going to attach to Aharon HaKohen's death. It's going to attach to Miriam HaKohen's death. What else is unbelievable in this week's Parsha? You know what else is unbelievable in this week's Parsha? The Yesod of Parah Adumah. When you stop a guy in the street and you ask him, what does a Parah Adumah represent? It's a chayk, the classic chayk. The unbelievable chayk. What makes it a classic chayk? One of the explanations is because the people, if you listen to this week's thing, we contaminate certain people as tzedaikim. No, that's in the written, not the audio. But the fact is that someone who is contaminated becomes pure, and someone who is pure becomes contaminated. The people who are helping the others became contaminated themselves. And the tzedaikim held that you need a completely pure person involved, and we hold even a somewhat contaminated person can be involved, but he will become maybe, depends on what part of the process. Which means the oddest thing in the world is something that becomes Torah to become Tameh. It's weird. When was the Parah Adumah, Rashi says, originally given? By Marah. What happened in Marah? You know what happened in Marah? We did another oddball thing. We took salty wood and put it into salty water, and it became drinkable. So the perfect time to hand over an halacha that people are going to scratch their heads and say, that halacha makes no sense to me. Good becomes bad, bad becomes good simultaneously. This spiritual stuff that God's putting out that doesn't sound too normal. So what do you mean? Is that more strange than salty wood into salty water to create purified water? That means God said, look what I'm doing here right after Shiras Hayam, when they went 3 days without water and they put the salt in it. Right then Rashi says, now you know how the chay can use. Now you know why. But what about this week's Parsha? This week's Parsha is a mind-blowing idea. What happens in this week's Parsha? After Miriam passed away, the next part of the Parsha, that now will connect the Parah Adumah. I thank you all. I thought of this today. It's probably because of you guys. What happens? The snakes come and bite the Jews. And then Moshe Rabbeinu makes a snake on a pole. And what happens? You look at the snake and you're healed. The Ramban and others say that it doesn't work that way normally. For some reason in the world it works. Maybe it's ancient medicine, maybe it's correct, maybe times have changed for whatever reason. But in those days, the point was, if someone was bit by a snake and he saw an image or that particular snake, something like that, instantaneous death. That means, let's say the snake bites you, it takes 15 minutes. I'm making up numbers now. If they would see the snake or an image of a snake, instantaneous. But yet, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to show this, like the Mishnah says, the snake doesn't kill. God kills. The snake doesn't make you alive. God makes you alive. So what God said was, you know what? Moshe Rabbeinu put a snake on a pole, let them look at it. Very similar to the water. Salty wood and salty water, because Hashem decides what's drinkable. Not salt. Not what you think is drinkable. HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides what's drinkable. HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides how a snake kills. So that law now, just like when it came to the water originally, that was when Rashi says, good time to teach you about the Adumah, because salt and salt equals good water, means don't worry about the Adumah striking you as a little odd. Because don't worry, the spiritual world doesn't have the same laws as the physical world. The Torah wants to remind you of this idea 40 years later, and in Parshas Chukas, when you have people looking at a snake, which should create, in the natural order of the world, instantaneous death, instead, it created instantaneous life. So Hashem said, oh yeah, by the way, don't question the Adumah, how purified people become contaminated. We're not on the same level field. We're in the spiritual world we live on. In the spiritual world, anything can happen. So that's another reason, potentially, why the laws of Adumah were specifically written in this week's Parsha. We all hope that will be Zeicha. As I said the other night, there are going to be 10 Adumas in the history of the world. Open Mishnah. 9 were already given by 7 people. Read the Mishnah. 10th one is Mashiach. Hopefully we will be able to use the Adumah, but not on the Jewish dead bodies. Hamei v'Yavin. Good Shabbos.